A lot of people have been leaving comments on our videos asking why our church would be LGBTQ affirming. Isn't that terrible? Isn't that against the Bible? You're going to hell, and so on. If you want a biblical analysis of why it's not a bad biblical position to have, I suggest you read a book by Colby Martin called Unclobbered that breaks down all of those passages. So this video isn't going to be about biblical cases for LGBTQ inclusion. This is actually going to be some of my testimony about how my heart was changed on this topic, because it's something I've changed my mind on. I used to think a church being LGBTQ affirming was just like progressive virtue signaling and not really important. It was just a political issue. But what changed my heart on this was hearing the stories of my queer friends and colleagues and about their experience in the church. And I found those testimonies absolutely heartbreaking, because I adore the church. I grew up in church. I loved the church so much. I loved my experience growing up in the church. I loved how much people cared for me and helped raise me. I loved it a lot. And then I discovered that many of my peers did not have the same experience in church. They were always worried about what would happen when their church found out that they were gay. And it just broke my heart that they couldn't go home and have the same loving and beautiful experience with church that I could. And as I went on and began to see the true harm the church was doing to people in making them think that Jesus would hate them, or making them hide part of themselves or be dishonest about who they were, it made me realize that I think we'd gotten this wrong. The church was causing a lot of harm and destruction to people who sincerely believed with all their hearts, minds, and strengths that God had sent Jesus Christ to save them. These were faithful people who were trying to love their neighbors as themselves, to love other people as Christ loved them, and it just broke my heart. And so seeing that, and then as a pastor talking with teenagers dealing with coming out and the fears they had over what their parents would think, what the church would think, how I would treat them, whether I hated them, whether God hated them, it just made me realize that perhaps we'd gotten something wrong here. And if the greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself, then I think that's what we should be focusing on, rather than making people change who they've been created to be. There are a lot of things we can't change about the world, or that we can't control, but we can control the messages we give to kids about whether they are loved by God. And there's a lot of research that shows that teen suicide goes way down when there are supportive adults in kids' lives, and that number is even larger when we're talking about LGBTQ youth. On a very practical level, I think the question we should be asking ourselves is, do we want queer teenagers to be alive, or do we want them to be dead? And I think the Bible comes down quite heavily on wanting people to be alive. God is always working to preserve life and to have us choose things that go for life, that lead us into life, that lead us into abundant life. And that's what I see this as. This is a pro-life decision. We're saying that God has come so that we might have life and have it abundantly.